Hi, Michelle. Thanks so much for joining me today on this episode of Concentrating on Chromatography. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, David.
Just to start, would you be able to introduce yourself to the audience?
Of course. My name is Michelle Taylor. I am the editor in chief of the B2B brand LabCompare, which is a online buyer's guide and resource guide for all things analytical laboratory. So you'll find products on there and you can compare them and contrast them. You'll find articles written by me about trending topics. You'll find articles written by other subject matter experts. It's a wealth of knowledge on everything and anything laboratory.
Absolutely. One thing I was really excited to talk to you about for today was the two PFAS documentaries that your group has put together. And just to start, what were the largest surprises from your work on those two documentaries produced by LabCompare?
Absolutely. Yeah, the documentaries are some of my favorite projects. We talk about the trendy kind of topics, and obviously PFAS is one of those. Lately, it's been everywhere for the past couple of years now. So I was really excited to interview subject matter experts on what they're seeing in the PFAS industry. And to me, the biggest surprise came from the second documentary when all of the subject matter experts said that they do not eat any seafood anymore. And some of them had stopped eating seafood like 10 years ago. And I'm sitting there, oh, yeah, okay, nodding my head, thinking, oh, I definitely had clams like last night. Oh, that was eye-opening for me. I won't say it changed anything because I really like seafood, but it did have me thinking about a lot of things.
Yeah, and I thought that was some great editing on your team's part as far as leading in with that. It was certainly unexpected. I knew the topic would be food, but to lead with such a strong statement that no longer eating seafood, it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I knew that they were going to be like, oh, not the best. There's some contamination, but right off the bat to be like, oh, absolutely not. That was in your face.
And the documentaries did a really great job highlighting that a lot of laboratories are overwhelmed with samples and facing somewhat slow turnaround times. What strategies are labs using to increase capacity while still maintaining that parts per trillion sensitivity that's required by the new regulations?
Of course, and that's the hardest part. So, what happens is a lot of laboratories rely on automated sample preparation systems and platforms because that at least does speed the manual labor part of it, which is always the most tedious. So, after that, what we've seen is a lot of laboratories use a tiered testing approach. So, they're using a single quad instrument for initial screening. And then, if there's a positive hit, then they move on to something more sensitive like a triple quad for that confirmation. And that's just a really good way for laboratories to stretch their capacity without sacrificing the sensitivity and the PPT that the PFAS industry is quickly becoming known for.
And I can certainly speak to this on the instrument manufacturer side of things, but a challenge that we've covered on the podcast with MacMod and some others is that PFAS can creep into the laboratory tools and containers that scientists and researchers are using, and that really can lead to false positives. So, how critical is the specialized usage of PTFE free equipment for really attempting to get the right answers?
Yeah, it is so critical. Like keeping constant vigilance over solvents, water, tubes, containers. It's a daily challenge. It's a minutely challenge basically for researchers in PFAS labs. And as you said, they're already overburdened. So that's just another thing that these researchers are like, I don't want to have to deal with this. So the manufacturers who provide the PFAS-free equipment or the containers and everything, I mean, unsung heroes for analytical chemists who are like in the trenches of PFAS analysis. So that's definitely one thing. And honestly, as we go forward, I think that the PFAS-free equipment is going to become even more critical, because labs and definitely regulations are pushing toward lower and lower detection limits. So that background interference, that background contamination absolutely cannot be present as we go lower and lower. So it is so critical.
And even though, speaking for Organimation, our equipment was already cited in some of the popular drinking water analysis methods, 533 and 537.1, to make things easy for people, we ended up launching a dedicated option code that was for PFAS free. So it's a distinct product page, order code to identify the product, so people don't have to worry that there's no Teflon produced and or included in this equipment, just to put people's minds at ease. Because if you don't go that route, then you're just always having to answer the question rather than having something specific you can point to.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's such a great example of manufacturers responding to the industry, right? A little while ago, a couple of years ago, when we weren't looking at PPT, we were just, okay, there's PFAS contamination, where is it? No one was thinking about background, like we weren't thinking about background interference. So, it's a testament to how the science evolves, how the sensitivity evolves, and then it's a testament to the manufacturers responding to the researchers being like, hey, no, background is getting all messed up. Please stop.
And returning to seafood, if we could, my understanding is that analyzing high lipid samples like fish can be very complicated and very expensive. What advice did your experts offer for labs struggling to maintain productivity when dealing with fatty, complex extracts?
Yeah, seafood is difficult. So the key that the subject matter experts I've interviewed tell me is, for analyzing the high lipid samples, you need an aggressive extraction to free the analytes. And then you need a strict cleanup to remove the lipids. And it's really that cleanup step with the lipids that is the most critical step, because if you don't have that, then the fats degrade the liquid chromatography columns and then cause severe matrix interferences. So it creates a whole host of problems. Right now, I have seen a lot of labs using and finding success with enhanced matrix removal or some similar carbon-based / silica sorbents. So right now, that's kind of where the industry standard is at. We do expect it to, at some point, get even more technical. There's some room for change. But right now, that carbon-based is really doing its job on the cleanup to remove the lipids.
One thing I was always concerned about, and again, that's with no scientific perspective on my part, honestly, but I was always concerned about takeout containers and always being skeptical about the idea of, if I'm having Uber Eats delivered to my hotel and I'm at a conference, microwaving those containers, even if it says it's safe. It was always a concern. And the documentary did an excellent job detailing how PFAS can leach from takeout boxes or popcorn bags into food. And I understand that some states like Rhode Island have begun to phase out those materials. How should contract labs begin to prepare for that surge in demand for compliance and migration testing?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're getting there. The industry is going to get there. It's slow, but it's steady, and we're going to get there. Pizza boxes will never be the same in a few years. I'll say that. But for laboratories, the best advice that I've been given that I can share is that for any incoming regulatory wave, whether it's related to PFAS or not, honestly, it's just critical to stay on top of the news that comes out of the regulatory agencies and especially the conferences, to kind of track those proposed actions before they become final. Because in this way, you can keep your staff trained on the latest technology. So your lab is ready to test in-house as soon as the new rules take effect, rather than kind of scrambling to accommodate once the guidelines land. And then you're like, oh, got to be ready. If you're already there, like as soon as they land, you are ready to go and pop off.
And I super appreciate any content I can find related to international standards? Because I think it's really easy when you're based here in the US to just focus on what's going on here. But it was really interesting to learn about how the regulations in the European Union are different, where it's my understanding it's more strict, the limits in PFAS for seafood, meat, eggs, while in the US it's a little more focused on monitoring and import alerts. How is the discrepancy affecting US labs that support international food exporters?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like most things, the EU has stricter guidelines than the United States, right? So specifically for US labs, it does three main things, I'd say. It forces the US testing labs to adopt like a dual compliance model. It also forces us to invest in like ultra trace testing equipment, that PPT that we're constantly talking about. And in a less analytical method, it just means navigating supply chains that are fragmented and kind of all over the place. But for a good example, I think this is a good one. So if you're doing the dual compliance model for the EU and the US, for the US, labs screen a broader list of evolving PFAS compounds. So there's a good amount of them. Whereas for the EU market, labs have to look at parts per trillion of a targeted testing specifically for 4 primary PFAS. PFOS and PFOA, we see a lot in the US. They're the most common PFAS. But then also PFNA and PFHXS. And these are specifically laid out in EU regulation 2023-915. The US ones don't have look for this, and this. It's just, look for PFAS. So it's definitely, there's a road for the labs that are doing both. They do it well, but it gets tricky when you're looking at both sides of it and making sure that your audit and your compliance is in step with which nation it needs to be in step with.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that it's really when that regulation is fully installed that there's that wave of testing, and it's tricky to prepare for because especially on the equipment side, I know that a lot of distributors are in a holding pattern. They want to be educated on what could be coming down the line, but until everything is signed and installed, let's say, the work actually doesn't need to be done. But yeah, there's only going to be more of it, and it will only spread beyond the US and the EU into other countries.
Absolutely. I mean, there's also a time element to it. It takes longer, and time is money, right? There's more downtime, there's more uptime, there's more everything when you're doing things twice and with different protocols. So it's just more complex.
And one thing I've heard about a couple times, but I haven't checked out, hopefully this weekend I'll get a chance to watch it, was the somewhat recent movie Dark Waters. That comes up in the documentary just as a great example of how obviously you and I are exposed to PFAS working in our industry, but in terms of educating people, the greater public on PFAS, it's some of the media where it's come up. Do you see public pressure leading to faster federal mandates in areas like food testing, similar to what we've seen from drinking water?
I would say yes and no, which I know is not a great answer. But I think with food specifically, sometimes people don't want to know what's actually in the food they enjoy. And this goes back to my answer when we first started talking about this. Like, especially in this industry, I am 100% aware that there is PFAS in my mussels and clams. Am I still going to eat it? Yep, I am. And that's just because food is so integral to our lives. Like, it is, we do everything around food. So changing your food habits because of contamination is like a lifestyle change. That can be really difficult for people, the general public especially, to like get around and to just have to deal with that. And it's the government telling them also, which can be difficult for some people. Some people don't like that. Some people do like that. So it depends on your worldview, I think. I think that has a lot to do with it. With water, I feel like water is just different than food because it's everywhere. It's so ubiquitous. We use it for everything. So I feel like with water, if we put public pressure to say like we need cleaner water, I feel like federal mandates for that come faster. And we did see that, in fact. And even the government was like, we need to focus on water first. Like, yes, we know food is a problem, but they were very explicit in saying, okay, let us handle the water with the EPA first and get EPA methods out. And then we will turn to food. And that's exactly what they did. Like, they knew what they were doing when they laid out the roadmap. But there was a reason that water went first. It's just different than food. It has a different connotation to it. So yes, public pressure will lead to faster federal mandates. Although the caveat is, I think food is a different area than something like water.
Just thinking out loud, you can make the argument that water can and is a municipal good that's provided, right? Or it's not the case with food. So it's very different in that sense.
Exactly. Yes. It's just so different. Like, it seems so silly because you're like food, water, but it's such a different thing. And it's such a different element, the way we get it, the way we test it, the way even adding fluoride to it. Some counties do, some don't. And it's like, my dentist always asks, is it okay if we give fluoride to your kids? I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But there are people who say, nope, that's not okay. So it's a different mindset for food and water, for sure.
Certainly we don't know the future, but I think it is interesting. We touched on Rhode Island earlier, where you do see different states taking leadership positions in areas like banning PFAS in packaging. Do you think the industry will move towards proactively installing PFAS-free materials voluntarily just because of that patchwork of different state laws? Or do you think it's more likely that eventually we just have a national federal standard? Because that seems to be, going back to the water comparison, setting those federal limits seems to be the usual operation.
I would say the majority of the PFAS subject matter experts I've interviewed, they think that the federal mandate will come once a critical mass of states has a ban on PFAS packaging. I think patchwork is the exact right word. We will see it over here and over here and over here, but it will be patchwork. There will definitely not be something that covers every state until we have that federal. And I don't think the experts think that we will have that federal until there are enough states. What number is that? I'm not sure. But at some point, it also becomes cost prohibitive for suppliers, if there is that critical mass, to not just go PFAS free. Like, at some point, it's harder to stay with what you have than go PFAS free if the majority of the states are already there. So it's going to turn. I definitely think food packaging is one of those, like the pizza boxes and it's the takeout boxes. That, I think, is the thing that's going to get this to turn around the quickest and to get a federal mandate and get the states mandates. Because food, like, it's such an integral part of our lives, and you eat out so often and you take things home. Like, it's just so important that that's what's going to, I think, end up creating more and more of these regulations that we'll see passed down in probably not too long.
One thing I was happy was discussed was method 1621, which I'm not too familiar with, total organic fluorine. And that really screens for the totality of PFAS in a sample. How are labs using these screening technologies to decide which samples require more intensive targeted LC-MS analysis?
Of course, yeah. Yeah, EPA method 1621 is great. It was one of the first ones they put out. 1633 was another one of the first ones they did. But yeah, 1621 captures the total organic fluoride present. So that helps labs close the mass balance gap between what targeted LC-MS panels catch and then what's actually present. which includes the unknowns caught by the non-targeted high-resolution MS. So I mentioned before, it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of, you use a single quad as the inexpensive screening instrument to check whether PFAS are present. And then if there's a hit, the sample is escalated to the more sensitive triple quad for full quantitation. So with food packaging, we're just talking about food packaging. So as an example, a total fluorine screen done first would give a yes or no on whether PFAS are present. Then if it's a yes, the sample moves on to the targeted, more sensitive triple quad analysis. And that can get us that PPT and whatever else we may need to do. Because at some point, there's going to be more even added to the triple quads. They're already thinking about that. So, but it's a really good system of trying to figure out first what's there or what's not there, and then kind of taking it through the funnel. I guess you go from low to high to see what's there and what's not.
And high resolution mass spectrometry can generate huge quantities of data identifying thousands of unnamed compounds. Are you seeing a trend where bench chemists are really having to become data scientists in a sense to manage the advanced statistics and machine learning connected to these workflows?
100%. Even without the surge in PFAS testing, even if we're not talking about PFAS, this is already happening. This is actively happening in our workflow, in our workforce. The ability to understand and manage data, and then even more collaborate effectively with advanced platforms like AI systems and large language models, that's, I don't want to say it, but it's almost as important as to operating a mass spec. Like you have to know how to do both entering today's workforce, or maybe the workforce of the future. And I don't necessarily want to paint that in a negative light, because it's not. It's just growth. Whereas we used to need, and right now I would say still need specialists to handle that mass spec data, that role is changing because AI and machine learning reduce the complexity of that data. And it really democratizes the expertise, because now AI is able to interpret data in natural language and give it back to the inexperienced mass spec user in a way that they can understand. So you're not running to the specialist who may not be at the laboratory, who may be at a conference, who may be on vacation, and saying, I don't know what this data means. Now this inexperienced mass spec user who is still fully capable but is learning can give that data to an agentic AI that is run within their company and say, hey, what does this mean? And AI will tell you what it means and you will understand, and you can move on to the next step of your workflow without waiting for somebody else, which is probably the best part of that, is that the waiting time is reduced. And scientists always say, I want to focus on what's important. Like, I don't want to do this, and this. I like the same thing with manual parts of workflows that are now automated. Everyone, 20 years ago, automation, no. It's just making it less tedious. And that's what this is. You're making that data less tedious for other users. And it's definitely a different work. We're going to see a different workforce in 5 years, maybe less.
On the data analysis side, two major benefits in terms of, for one, it's having this automation do the analysis that someone could do manually, and you're able to get to the same answer in less time or more efficiently. But one of the earliest takeaways I had from AI and machine learning, going back to the breakthrough related to protein folding, was that these systems really excel in finding patterns that we just can't.
Yeah.
So no matter how good someone potentially was and the most skilled analyzer of data, let's say, the idea that the system could find things that the most qualified person never could, and that leading to breakthroughs is something that we've already seen, which is super exciting.
100%. We watch TV shows on people who recognize patterns, right? That we're like, oh, I want to read a book on a superhuman, but that's not real. This is giving us AI, well-trained AI and generative AI that we're working on with our scientific data sets. It's giving us like superhumans. So it's an interesting place to be right now for sure.
And I talked a little bit about Organimation, my company's involvement in the space. In terms of my exposure has been very much on the drinking water methods. But one event I checked out in the Research Triangle, which I believe is an annual event put on by the Air and Wastewater Management Association, was a Science of PFAS conference. And it seems silly now, but at the time, I really hadn't been exposed to what PFAS destruction was. I was so focused on the laboratory and the detection side of it. And so many of the challenges are really on the destructive side in terms of, okay, you've identified and found them. How do you get rid of these things? So, what does the removal and destruction of PFAS look like for the analytical laboratory based on the work you did for the documentaries?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many researchers working on this actually, and they do get lost in that conversation. Destructive treatment right now tries to break the carbon fluoride bond, and it's been successful. It's been promising for kind of fully defluorinating PFAS in environmental matrices. But what kind of gets lost in that conversation is that this waste destruction method, which is mostly incineration, it doesn't fully break down the PFAS. It converts the long chain PFAS into shorter chain PFAS. And then those shorter chain PFAS then get emitted into the air through this incineration, creating more PFAS problems. Maybe not more PFAS, but there's still PFAS. It's now in the air instead of in the water. So you're just making more PFAS, which is not what we're trying to do. So now the laboratories are looking into remediation and destruction methods that can confirm a true, complete breakdown of PFAS. But they're also monitoring for byproduct emissions, which is much different than the analytical goal of regulatory monitoring of PFAS. So it's a different layer of PFAS, still related. These analytical laboratories are still going to be doing it, but we're going to see a lot of different instrumentation come in. There's a lot of actually undergrad research that I've seen through the documentaries and just going to trade shows like PitCon and stuff. You see a lot of undergrads working on it because they know how important it is. The people in the laboratories, they were like, oh, PFAS, it's here. We have to look at it. We have to find out how much it is. Now the younger generation, okay, it's here. You guys are finding out how much it is. We need to find out how to get rid of it, or we're not going to be safe. I look at it as a generational thing for how laboratories will end up changing and who will be doing this remediation and destruction methods. And I find it funny. I'm like, even when I talk to people, they're like, oh, my lab doesn't like do PFAS. We don't do that. And I'm like, okay, maybe not. If you do any kind of mass spec and chromatography, if your lab is a heavy user for that, like you may get pulled into this PFAS puzzle because it is going to be way more than like monitoring for PFAS and testing and analyzing for them and finding them. As we're going to see, there's so much more to this puzzle. So just get ready.
Yeah, and I always try and make time to go to poster presentations. And yeah, those are definitely some of the ones I've stopped to talk with the presenter. Some of the presentations focused on looking at PFAS in fish from Lake Michigan, let's say. Those are always really interesting, and it's really easy to stop at that poster because the work is so pressing and important, and you could see how it impacts all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I would say I am always impressed by the younger generation, the undergrad, the graduate research, because they're just so present and it's so easy to just connect to your everyday life that we're like, oh, okay, tell me about that.
I certainly appreciate the team at LabCompare taking on producing these long form documentaries, because that's not really something that's being done right now by any of the other content publishers in this space. Is there more coming to this series, or is it just slated for a 2-part release?
So for PFAS, right now, we're just doing 2, mostly because we've covered the 2 largest matrices in water and food, right? But they're called forever chemicals for a reason. Like, they're not going anywhere. So you may very well see a 3rd documentary on PFAS. If I had to guess, my money would probably be on a 3rd documentary on PFAS in the air. It's even beyond the destruction, the incineration that it creates. PFAS is going to be in the air naturally, just in the same way it's in water and food. I think that's definitely, and a bunch of subject matter experts have brought that up during the filming of the 1st documentary, and I actually hadn't even thought about it that much. I was so focused on like the drinking water regulations. The documentary had come out right when the drinking water regulations were released. So I was hyper focused. And then the subject matter expert for Agilent was like, oh, in the air. I was like, in the air? Like, I'm breathing right now. Come on. So that definitely got me. So I think if we see a 3rd one, it will be on that. Our next documentary that's not PFAS related, but we do have one slated for coming out before the end of the year. It's on sustainability in food and the food supply chain. So obviously, things are changing. The food supply chain is always changing with global warming and climate control and trading and stuff. The food supply chain is always questionable. So it's just talking about figuring out how we can be more sustainable in the foods that we end up consuming so much of, like beans or coffee and tea, rice. So those staples that we use so often and that most of the countries use, not just the US. How to be more sustainable in those, and the analysis of them, and the supply of them, the whole picture.
And on the PFAS documentaries, was there anything we may have missed that you wanted to share with the audience, or do you think we pretty much covered it?
Ooh, good question. I just think it's just really interesting to see how everything is going to change. Even from when we did the 1st one, which was not that long ago. So there's more rules, there's more guidelines, there's more regulations. A question that I consistently ask, and I think my interviewees get mad at me because they're like, how am I supposed to answer that? But I'm always like, so with the ever-evolving, changing regulations, and they're like, they're ever-evolving. You're literally saying they're ever-evolving, they're changing. How can I answer that? I'm like, I know it's not a fair question, but I have to ask it. But that's where we are right now. Everything, it's just ever-evolving. So I think that my take-home message is, I love these documentaries. They have really good information. But to your point of maybe there's another one, everything just keeps changing. And the science keeps growing, the instrumentation keeps growing, the manufacturers are growing. So everything is growing and changing and evolving. And it's going to be really interesting to see where PFAS ends up in a little bit, 5, 10 years, even 20 years, then looking back at it. I kept trying to find a suitable example of where this has happened before. And I couldn't really think of one. Like from the 80s, I would say maybe this is completely different, but maybe a forensic world when we were able to analyze DNA. We were able to actively take the DNA and start analyzing it. So there was so many iterations of using capillary electrophoresis and then using like something like next generation sequencing and then using other genetic components. So it's kind of, I see it like that we're the tiered approach to, okay, in this year we know this, the next year we know this, the next year we know this. That's what I see, where I see PFAS going and how we see it evolving in the future.
And speaking of the evolving regulations, I just drafted a blog post for Organimation.com focused on the proposals connected to UCMR 6. Again, it's still in the proposal phase, but in terms of all our commercial lab customers who are part of those programs who will have to adapt and comply with whatever new methods are developed, it's certainly worth staying on top of the best we can.
100%. That we were just talking about that. You got to keep on top of this information because it's going to hit you. It's going to hit you sooner or later. And it's better that you're prepared than you're like, oh, I wasn't ready for that.
Absolutely. Michelle, thanks so much for the time today. I'll make sure to include links to LabCompare and the documentaries, and I hope more people check it out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was a great talk, David.